Queen Victoria. Known as the Widow of Windsor, she's buried in the mausoleum at Frogmore, Windsor Castle, and her bronze statue stands here in the heart of the royal borough. She has watched over resplendent royal weddings, impressive state visits, and even royal funerals, including her own in 1901. Designed by Sir Edgar Boehm, it has stood here since 1887, when it was erected to celebrate her Golden Jubilee. Since then, millions of visitors have passed this way to see the treasures on display in the castle and to marvel over its history as a royal fortress and home. In this video I'll look at Elizabethan Windsor, in particular Queen Elizabeth I's fear of assassination and the cruel hanging of the so-called Windsor witches during her reign. On a more positive note, how William Shakespeare used observations of local characters from Windsor's Garter Inn for his comedy play The Merry Wives of Windsor. It is very likely that Shakespeare stayed at the Garter Inn, and his play, written in just 14 days, was performed for Queen Elizabeth at the castle on the 24th of April 1597. The Garter Inn during Shakespeare's time stood where today's Hart and Garter Hotel is, opposite Queen Victoria's statue. The old Garter Inn can quite clearly be seen in John Norden's map of 1607, close to the White Hart Inn in the High Street. Their inn signs depicting their positions very close to the castle walls. Also shown are the town's pillory, used for punishing local villains, again in a prominent position in the centre of the town's High Street. Queen Victoria wasn't around to keep a watchful eye on the town in Elizabethan times. Instead, Elizabeth sent her own powerful message by having a set of gallows erected here. She had left London in 1593 when the semi-walled city of around 150,000 people was infested with the plague again, killing some 2,000 individuals between August 1592 and January 1593. The dreaded Windsor gallows were Elizabeth's warning that visitors outside of the town would hang if they didn't keep their distance. As a visible deterrent, it seemed to work, as there is only one recorded death in the castle from the plague at that time, a 12-year-old boy, the page of Lady Philadelphia Scrope, one of Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting. This is the same Lady Scrope who is said to have ripped a ring from Queen Elizabeth's dead hand when she died at Richmond Palace in 1603. She then threw the ring out of a window to her brother, Robert Carey. Carey then rode for 3 days to Edinburgh and presented it to James VI of Scotland as proof that Elizabeth was dead and that he would also become James I of England. But spare a thought for the 12-year-old page. If you visit Windsor Castle and ascend the 200 steps to the top of the round tower, you will be stepping on his grave, as he is buried somewhere beneath the stone stairs. I've already referred to the Garter Inn, mentioned by Shakespeare in the first scene, third act of the play, when he writes about mine host of the Garter. He also tells us that Sir John Falstaff, Shakespeare's fat, vain and boastful knight, stayed at the Garter Inn for £10 a week. But there is a sinister side to the history of the Garter Inn. In Elizabethan times it was owned by Richard Gallis, Windsor's mayor and one-time member of Parliament, who was educated at nearby Eton College. His name lives on to this day as the borough named a road after him to the west of the town. Eventually the Garter Inn would pass on to his sons. Richard Jr. would have been the working landlord during Shakespeare's time, as James, his brother, was officially classed as a lunatic. Richard Jr. blamed local women for his brother's lunacy, saying that the Windsor witches had made his brother bereft of his wits, until this day not his own, still crying, "Away with the witch, away with the witch." Although Richard himself was sane, he was also obsessed with these local women. One of them, Elizabeth Styles, he even roped and dragged to the house of the then mayor, Richard Redforth, who immediately instructed him to release her. Eventually, Richard's obsession caused him to be taken into custody, manacled and imprisoned in what he described as a deep dungeon into which I was let up and down with a rope. He was released after 2 days, still blaming 4 local witches for his imprisonment. Following this experience, Richard found it prudent to leave the country, returning only when his father was dying, his eventual death again being attributed to the witches, saying that his father died because of these hellhounds and imps of the devil. Richard Jr. even printed and distributed a pamphlet to bring the witches, all elderly poor women from the slums of Windsor, to justice. A copy of that pamphlet still exists in the Bodleian Library to this day. Elizabethan England was a superstitious witcher-wear society. Queen Elizabeth felt herself threatened by witchcraft, and her mother Anne Boleyn had been accused of being a witch herself. She is said to have had 6 fingers on one hand and her body covered with 7 moles, giving credence to the accusation of having a devil's teat. 7 and not 13 was the number associated with the devil in Tudor times. It is also said that Henry VIII courted her for 7 years before they married, and that she miscarried a child at 7 months when the devil abandoned her. Elizabeth herself experienced witchcraft when 3 wax witch dolls were found in a dunghill. One of them had the name Elizabeth across the forehead. The dolls, similar to voodoo dolls of today, were pierced with hog bristles. Such dolls, known as poppets, were made to represent the people upon which spells or magic were cast. John Dee, Elizabeth's own sorcerer, was summoned to assess the omen and to find a counter-spell. Mendoza, the Spanish ambassador, wrote that the Queen responded with her customary fear of assassination. When it reached the Queen's ears, he wrote, she was disturbed as it was looked upon as an augury and heralded a Catholic assassination plot against her. Suspects were rounded up and tortured in the Tower of London, with the rack forcing a so-called confession. The Queen then started complaining of facial pain due to the hog bristles in the wax dolls. In her fury, she ordered that some Catholics be found and charged with witchcraft. 2 men were arrested and condemned to death. Then a new confession came to light. One Thomas Elkes admitted to making the dolls, not as a curse or spell on the Queen, but to cast a love spell for a wealthy client lusting after a local beauty. Other reasons were then sought for the Queen's facial pains, and she was found to have a rotten tooth. So ended the curse of the wax puppets. Just a year later, at Abingdon Assizes, the 4 women from Windsor went on trial accused of witchcraft. Elizabeth Styles, the woman Richard Gallis had roped and dragged to the then Mayor of Windsor's house, was one of them, said to be helped with her witchcraft by a familiar or evil spirit, in her case a rat she kept called Philip, which she fed with blood from her hand. Similarly, the other 3 women, Mother Jewel, Mother Margaret and Mother Dutton, were all said to have evil familiars, a cat fed on milk mixed with the witch's blood, and another spirit fed with human blood and crumbs. Also a toad kept in a herb garden and fed with human blood. They were all accused of making red wax poppets pierced with hawthorns, and having made sick or killed Windsor residents, including the former Mayor of Windsor, Richard Gallis. All 4 were found guilty and hanged, so the Gallis family got their revenge. In the Windsor Parish Church, tucked behind the Guildhall and just a short walk from Queen Victoria's statue and the old site of the Garter Inn, Mayor Gallis lies buried in the middle of the south aisle. His coat of arms hang on the wall, and a brass plate over his grave states he was learned and lived a godly life. But there is one more twist to the story of the Garter Inn. John Dean, an 8-year-old Windsor boy, was accused of setting fire to 2 outhouses of the Garter Inn in February 1629. The judge said that this little boy had malice, revenge, craft and cunning. John Dean was indicted, trialed and found guilty in a single day. The youngest person ever hanged in England, a record the Garter Inn and the town of Royal Windsor cannot erase from its history.